Hi everyone, welcome back. Going to do a book review today. Going to talk about the 1984-85 novel by Don DeLillo. The title is White Noise. This might be his most well-known novel outside of Underworld, which was a novel DeLillo published later in the 1990s. But White Noise, just to give you a little bit of what the book is about. So we have two main characters. We have Professor Jack Ladney and his wife Babette. Jack teaches Hitler studies at the local college, and Babette also teaches as a volunteer in the community. They've both been married before, and are on. I know Jack is on his fourth marriage, I believe, fourth or fifth marriage. So they have kids living under the same roof from previous marriages, but also they have kids of their own as well. So we have this large household, almost like a sitcom setup, and DeLillo's playing on that dynamic a little bit. The novel is divided into three parts. The first part is called, I believe, was it Waves and Radiation, which is basically about the family. This book is a strong satire of many things: academia, family, consumerism, drugs, conspiracy theories. You a lot. Yeah, there's just a lot of things this book is satirizing. So that first third of the book is the satire. The second part of the book is called the Airborne Toxic Event, which is an explosion or something near the town forces the people to evacuate, and because the gas or the air has become damaged or poisonous. And then the third section, which is called, is it, remember here, I believe it's called Dialar, I believe. Yeah, Dialorama, which is about the aftermath of the airborne toxic event. And the novel gets a little bit more serious in tone for that third part of it. I think the first section of the novel is by far the strongest. DeLillo is really on fire with the satire and everything he is commenting on, and I'll talk more about that. The second part is more like a disaster movie where the family has to flee and everything's uncertain. And the third section of the novel, I think, is the weakest, where it gets a little bit more plot driven, and we get more into some of the distrust and dynamics in the marriage between Jack and Babette. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So, but that's basically what the book is about. And I also will briefly touch upon the movie towards the end of the video. But just to talk about some of the themes in White Noise, one of them is mortality. The two main characters are constantly talking about their fear of dying and their fear of being the first one to die in the marriage, that the idea that they're so in love with each other, one could not bear to live without the other if that came to pass. So there's a lot of that in the novel, just about fear of disaster, fear of a diagnosis, a lot of anxiety. And we're talking about a very privileged family here, white, you might say middle class, even upper middle class. They have all the comforts of 1980s America, TV, food, shopping is a big part of the novel. So they have so much stuff. They are able to live comfortable lives, and yet they're so full of anxiety all the time. Specifically, the two adult characters, and constantly worried about what's going to happen to them. So there's definitely some commentary there. The academia satire as well, where the idea of being a professor of Hitler studies, and there's a colleague of Jack's, Murray, who is a professor of Elvis Presley studies, and we're getting into the 1980s, and postmodern ideas are starting to influence college campuses, and the way they're the way the humanities are taught by, hyper focused studies. The media is a big part of it as far as how media shapes us, like the whole Marshall McLuhan idea. The medium is the message. We have so and not to get too much in the weeds of postmodern studies. I mean, I've had a little bit of that. I mean, in college I took a course on lit theory and some other courses on postmodernism, which I always found very interesting and very fascinating as far as as a way of reading books and analyzing movies. It's a fascinating way, I think, to look at it. And the book is really putting the characters into this postmodern mindset where the media is shaping so much of how they start to view reality, the whole idea of simulated reality becoming more real than real. Like there's a part in the book where they talk about watching disasters unfold on television and the sheer joy of watching a disaster happen over television, because it almost feels more real than real, And remember George Carlin did a comedy bit about that, about his love of watching disasters unfold on TV. So this idea how imagery and things like that are really shaping the way we see the world and reality, and the whole idea of Hitler studies. I know DeLillo has written about Hitler before, but Hitler as like the face of modern evil, a figure that people are still fascinated by, terrified by, and some really disturbed people who still find a lot there with Hitler, but by taking these massive cultural figures, or like an Elvis Presley, and using these lives as a way to understand our own reality and our past is there, and the book does a good job of that. So there's just a lot about how academia is changing. I get the sense that DeLillo is maybe not happy with some of these changes, but also maybe fascinated with them as well. So there's that. Consumerism is a big part of the book as well, and that kind of goes along with the postmodern idea of, consumerism becoming identity as far as shaping how we see the world, and we're defined by what we buy and what we like to buy, and all that. And so there's a lot of scenes at the supermarket where the whole family goes and they have these fun outings at the supermarket, and there's one part where they go to the mall do some Christmas shopping, and I think I'll just read a section of that just to give you an idea of DeLillo writing about consumerism in this book. So this is the family at the mall doing Christmas shopping, and this is how he describes it. Let's see. When I could not decide between two shirts, and this is Jack, I'm narrating this, they encouraged me to buy both. When I said I was hungry, they fed me pretzels, beer, souvlaki. The two girls scouted ahead, spotting things they thought I might want or need, running back to get me, to clutch my arms, plead with me to follow. They were my guides to endless well-being. People swarmed to the boutiques and gourmet shops. Organ music rose from the court. We smelled chocolate, popcorn, cologne. We smelled rugs and furs, hanging salamis, and deathly vinyl. My family gloried in the event. I was one of them, shopping at last. They gave me advice, badgered clerks on my behalf. I kept seeing myself unexpectedly in some reflecting surface. We moved from store to store, rejecting not only items in certain departments, not only entire departments, but whole stores, mammoth corporations that did not strike our fancy for one reason or another. There was always another store, 3 floors, 8 floors, basement full of cheese graters and paring knives. I shopped with reckless abandon. I shopped for immediate needs and distant contingencies. I shopped for its own sake, looking and touching, inspecting merchandise. I had no intention of buying, then I would buy it. I sent clerks into their fabric books and pattern books to search for elusive designs. I began to grow in value and self regard. I filled myself out, found new aspects of myself, located a person I'd forgotten existed. So, once again, this idea of finding your identity through shopping. Brightness settled around me. We crossed from furniture to menswear, walking through cosmetics. Our images appeared on mirrored columns in glassware and chrome, on TV monitors, in security rooms. I traded money for goods. Also, the whole idea of sensory overload of going to the mall. The more money I spent, the less important it seemed. I was bigger than these sums. These sums poured off my skin like so much rain. These sums, in fact, came back to me in the form of existential credit. I felt expansive, inclined to be sweepingly generous, and told the kids to pick out their Christmas gifts here and now. I gestured in what I felt was an expansive manner. Once again, that word expansive. I could tell they were impressed. They fanned out across the area, each of them suddenly inclined to be private, shadowy, even secretive. Periodically, one of them would return to register the name of an item with Babette, careful not to let the others know what it was. Just to skip ahead a little bit here, a band played live music. Voices rose from 10 stories from the gardens and promenades, a roar that echoed and swirled through the vast gallery, mixing with noises from the tiers, with shuffling feet and chiming bells, the hum of escalators, the sound of people eating, the human buzz of some vivid and happy transaction. We drove home in silence. We went to our respective rooms, wishing to be alone. A little later, I watched Steffi in front of the TV set. She moved her lips, attempting to match the words as they were spoken. So that kind of gives you a great passage there of DeLillo getting into the exuberance of consumerism and how it's just this magnificent force that changes people and gives people a high and everything. So that's one example of the consumerism of the book, and a 1980s mall was very much like that. So that's well described there. It's just some other ideas in the book. I mean, those are really the main themes. I mean, there's a little bit about conspiracy theories, shaping how we view reality, and speculation about current events and what's really behind what's going on, and then what's really, really behind that's going on, and what's really, really behind that. So, like this whole hierarchy of conspiracies, the kids are all into, and they have these intense discussions about whether it's weather patterns or conflicts or economic forces or whatever, you name it. And so there's always like a conspiracy behind everything, and the idea of thinking in those terms. Media saturation, I think, being completely overwhelmed by imagery and information is there in the book, and how disorienting that can be. Now, it might seem trite because this book is primarily concerned with television and how television is affecting people. But I mean, today I've mentioned this before, it's on steroids, with the amount of videos and imagery that are thrown at us today with online and everything. So that might come off as trite, but still it tells you, almost 40 years ago, this was, people were noticing this, and there's a lot of conversations among the parents about strategies of how to monitor what their kids are watching on TV. And like Jack and Babette have this idea of, if we all gather like on Friday nights and eat Chinese food and watch, bad goofy sitcoms, like maybe the kids will start to view TV as kind of lame and square, and they'll go away from it. So this whole idea of trying to make kids find these new technologies not as interesting as they might appear. Yeah, and there's also about drugs, especially in the last part of the book, about fears about health problems, all these studies coming out in the media about what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat, and what could prevent cancer, what could stop cancer. Once again, back to that anxiety idea. But at the same time, the idea of new drugs coming along that can do that. And the last part of the book gets into the drug Dialar, which is like this super anxiety drug that reportedly can take away your fear of death or anything. So that becomes a plot point in the last part of the book. I know that's been like DeLillo, an early novel of his, Great Jones Street, was also about a street drug, was a big plot point in that novel. So that's definitely something that we see throughout. So yeah, and as far as the second part, the airborne toxic event, it's like, what if like your greatest fear comes true? And that's really what that section gets into, as far as speculation about this explosion that possibly poisoned the air and people have to evacuate, and how just to have your everyday routine and reality disrupted like that, but also all the mystery surrounding this. It's even unclear at times whether it's actually happening. Is it some kind of mass simulation the government put on just to see how mass evacuations would go? And it's weirdly organized well, the people in charge of the evacuation, almost as if this has been planned for some time. And Jack has a conversation with a Jehovah's Witness family, and they're talking about the end times and everything. So there is like this little religious theme in the book as well, going through it. So, and then the last part of the book gets into more of the marriage and the aftermath of the event, where Jack believes he was exposed to toxic air and he might not have much longer to live, and Babette's becoming addicted to prescription drugs. So there is this kind of like thriller plot happening in the last part, but it also becomes absurd as it goes along too, especially what happens at the end. But it's almost like this sort of entropy hits the book in that last section, and maybe that was intentional on the author's part, just to kind of like all the themes, all the concerns of the story just start to kind of dissipate as we get towards the end, and it's not as dramatic as maybe we'd hope, but that's my we start to lose interest, I think, in these characters by the time we get to the end. So those are my thoughts on the novel for the most part. I do enjoy reading it. Like I said, even that third section has great stuff in it. I don't want to be too hard on it, but it does feel a bit anticlimactic when compared to the rest of the novel. Just a little bit. I did want to mention the movie, which in 2022 there was an adaptation made. It starred Adam Driver and Greta Gerwig. And the movie, what I liked about the movie, it does follow the narrative structure of the movie well. I believe Noah Baumbach directed it, wrote it. It does follow the structure of the novel. It is like a really, for the most part, a true adaptation of the book. And I like the look of the movie. It has the 80s look down well, and it has an interesting visual style to it, and a real sense of the absurd. So I like that aspect of it. But at the same time, I felt there was something toothless about the movie, where yes, it's a loyal adaptation to the novel, but somehow the power seems to not be where it should. Maybe because of the tone of the film, it leaned into absurdity and comedy a bit at times. But I also think that maybe it's because we've transcended so much of the themes and concerns in this book, where in adaptation many decades later, it feels like a period piece, and that it's more difficult to relate to. And I was even thinking of like The Simpsons, like the first 10 years of The Simpsons, which I think in their own way were inspired by white noise. And The Simpsons was satirizing pop culture and all these concerns that DeLillo has in this book, whether it's conspiracy theories or academia, religion, whatever. And The Simpsons did such a fantastic job of satirizing it, like in The Simpsons, like the nuclear power plant in the town, and all the humor about Mr. Burns, and all the corruption going on. It almost kind of runs rings around DeLillo as far as what he was doing with White Noise. So I think it was almost like, as I said, as a culture, we've absorbed the book, we've been through it, and by the time this new adaptation comes out, while there's many positive aspects to it, it did feel a bit like we've covered all this before. So I don't know. That was my take on the movie. But there's cool stuff in the movie. It does end with this dance sequence, which is not in the book, which was, I found that amusing, and some of the performances in there as well. So yeah. So those are my thoughts on the novel White Noise, and just a little bit on the film that came out a few years ago. So thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts on the novel or DeLillo, be great to hear them. But otherwise, have a good day, and I'll talk to you later.